Just to start off, my name is Anna. I'm one of the podcast interviewers for IYNA, which is the Neuroscience org at UIC. If you can introduce yourself.
I'm Angie Salles. I'm an assistant professor at UIC in the Department of Biological Sciences and the subgroup of neurobiology.
Okay. Just to start off, can we hear about your path to science and how you got up to this point?
I'm originally from Argentina, so I did my undergraduate education there and my PhD also there. So I have a degree in biology and a PhD in biology with a concentration in neuroscience. After that, for my postdoc, so I knew I wanted to be a professor and have a lab, and I knew I wanted to stay in research. And for that, given the situation in Argentina, the path is really to find a postdoc abroad. I did some research and I found a lab that I was really enthused for, which is Cindy Moss's lab at Johns Hopkins University. And I was lucky enough to get awarded an internship to go visit. So it was basically all expenses paid. And usually PIs, when you tell them I have money and I want to visit your lab, you don't have to pay me, I'll just come work for free. They're happy to have you. And we clicked, we got along great. It was a great experience. And from there on, she invited me to do a postdoc in her lab. And I was there for 5 years. At the end of which I was applying for jobs, and I got the opportunity to join UIC, and this was already 4 years ago. So I joined UIC and started my lab, and here I am.
Are you currently teaching any classes?
Yes, I teach 2 courses at UIC. So in the fall, I teach graduate students, and it's a course called Intro to Graduate School, where we touch topics from responsible conduct of research and ethics, and also how to make a poster and do an oral presentation, and what's the peer review process like. And also we include like a panel on careers in neuroscience for students who are doing graduate school. So that's what I teach in the fall, and in the spring I actually teach a class for undergraduate students. It's mostly aimed for neuroscience majors. It's a lab. It's a Neuroethology and Animal Behavior lab. We usually have about 22 students. I think that's as big as I can push it. And I know it's difficult because a lot of neuroscience majors need a lab to wrap up, but we do experiments with crickets, and it's only so many people we can have in the lab. So it's usually a fun group, and I'm excited to teach it again.
You said you did research in the past and currently as well. What kind of research did you do?
Well, as I mentioned, I work in neurobiology, and specifically, if we're gonna open up a little bit more that field, I work in a subfield of neuroscience called Neuroethology, which is the name of my class too, which is understanding and studying the neural basis of behavior. So I am interested in how behavior happens and what are the neural mechanisms underlying them. And neuroethology has been, characterized by studying kind of weird animal models, because we try to study the animals in which that behavior it can better be studied, right? You try to choose, we call it the champion animal model. So pick the animal that does the behavior the best, and there you can study the neural principles to extract commonalities and differences across taxa, right? So if we want to understand in particular, I'm interested in communication and auditory processing. So if I want to understand how the brain does this, I want to do it in an animal that does this well. And I believe that I should do one specific animal, which in my case is bats, because they're very communicative and they have mammalian brains and they are experts at auditory processing. But I also think other people should be doing this in other animals like songbirds and like marmosets, so that we can figure out what are the neural principles and neural mechanisms that connect all of these behaviors, like the similar behavior across taxa, and it can maybe give us some insight into how we do it, how our brain processes auditory communication. Yeah, so that's kind of the wrap up of the research that I do right now and that I've been doing already for a few years.
How many years have you been doing this research?
Generally, I've been in neuroethology. Let me say, I would consider, oh wow, maybe like 14 years or so. But in bats specifically, more like 10 years. Yeah, so before I used to study other animals. I did work with mice and with crabs before and doing comparative work with them. So, but yeah, it's been now a while that I've been working with bats, about a decade working with bats.
What advice would you give to students who are interested in research and trying to get into it?
I think it's important to approach something you're enthused for, and not get caught on, I feel, with the idea that you need to solve a neurological, disease or syndrome, because I feel like there's a lot that we still need to learn about how the healthy brain works. And that's kind of what we called fundamental research. And that's what my lab does. We want to understand how we do auditory processing. And I feel like sometimes students say like, oh, I want to understand Alzheimer's and I want to, or I want to work on the cure for Parkinson's. And that can be very disappointing because that's also fundamental research. A lot of labs that are working on Parkinson's are still trying to understand how the disease progresses. And it's not, it's obviously clearly clinically related, but it's fundamental research about understanding disease progression. So the idea that you will find a cure, it's far away from one PhD student's work. So I think being open to just being curious about the brain and finding a lab that kind of suits that, and also suits your interest in terms of what part of the brain are you interested in, what catches your attention. And another thing is write personalized emails. That's kind of maybe a silly thing to say, but I get so many emails that are like, dear professor, I want to join your lab. And then 100 lines of what they done and what is their expertise, and show me, if you want to join my lab, show me why you would be a good fit for my lab. What are your interests? What, you saw me speak at a class and thought my research was interesting, and from there went to read a paper, and that was something that caught your attention, so you can mention that paper or something about that paper in the email. Then I'm much more likely to say okay, let's meet, let's chat and see if we can find something for you to do in the lab. Then if I get a, dear professor, I want to join your lab and I'm an expert in microbiology, and I'm like, why would I want to have somebody who does microbiology in my lab? And I get that a lot. I think it's a very common mistake among undergrads.
Okay. What originally sparked your interest in neuroethology?
I think I love animals, so this maybe sounds a little childish, but I've always loved animals, and I've always loved behavior, looking at them and doing them, seeing them do their thing. It was it's still kind of funny. I have a dog, and every time she gets up and goes drink water, I'm still fascinated by it. The whole thing that she thought she's thirsty, and she decided to get up and go towards her water bowl, and she knows where the water bowl is, and I'm still fascinated by that kind of thing. So I think that really it was behavior, but then as I grew and started learning more about neuroscience, it was this idea that it wasn't just okay, she's standing up and she's deciding to go get water. What's going on in that brain that's leading to that behavior happening? What changes need to happen in her little brain to decide, okay, I'm gonna get up and go get some water. So I think that's what got me generally. I'm putting the example of my dog, but generally more in my work with bats, I find it fascinating how these animals, humans, we can say that we are the only species for which language is unique. So that's very interesting to me in terms of if I had to say the one thing that really sets us apart from other animals is language. Everything else seems more of a gradient. And the more I study communication, the more that I think language is also kind of a gradient. Maybe linguists will get really angry at me. But yeah, just thinking that other animals have very complex way of acoustically communicating with each other just fascinates me.
Do you think there was like a specific mentor or role model that influenced what you went into?
100%. 100%. I do think, I was lucky. I had a fantastic postdoc advisor. I mentioned her, Cindy Moss. She's very driven. She is, she was a fantastic mentor. And I also had an amazing mentor as a PhD student. My doctoral advisor, Ramiro Freudenthal, he's in Argentina, and he's very curious, he's very rigorous. He really taught me how to think about science. And I remember, I would have a hypothesis, and I would get the result didn't match my hypothesis, and I was like, oh, the data didn't show what I wanted it to show. And he was like, the data shows what the data shows. Like, it's not what you want it to show, it's what it is, and it's interesting regardless, even if it's not what you thought it was going to be. So it really taught me how to think, and that was great. So those were like great mentors. I do have to say, I'm going to be silly and say that growing up, I really did like, shows on the TV, like David Attenborough and Steve Irwin and those kind of shows. So I would guess there, or hearing about Jane Goodall, all of those people in the media kind of influenced my growing up until I got to my more academic career.
What would you say is the most exciting or surprising thing you've encountered or found recently?
Well, we're working on two very exciting projects right now. To briefly tell you about one of them, we're working with a species of bat that is found across Latin America. So it goes as far south as the north of Argentina and as far north as the south of Mexico. This species is called Carolia perspicillata, and we also have a captive colony in the lab. And a result that we're finding is that these animals have geographical dialects. So although the calls that they're making are the same, and we can classify them and say, like, this is an aggression call, and this is a territorial call, and this is a mating call. We can classify them, but when we look at the geographical groups, each group has like a specific signature to it. And I find this fascinating because I think about it as accents, right? So it's the same species and speaking the same language, and I'm doing air quotes here, but it's they still have their slight differences depending on the group, which to me talks a lot about this parallelism with thinking about it as this complex communication system. So that's one of the projects that we're looking at. And another exciting result that we got recently, looking at how the brains of bats are responding to different communication calls, we actually found a striking sex difference in how the brain of bats is responding to different types of calls, specifically aggression calls. Seems like the neurons of female bats are very attuned to respond quickly and strongly to aggression calls, more so than males. And we don't know why yet, and we're looking more into it, and it's preliminary data, but I'm excited about it because we kind of didn't expect a sex difference at that level.
Do you think any recent discoveries changed how did it affect your research in any way?
Yeah, so a recent discovery by a colleague of mine in Germany, and I'm going to say recent, but I think the paper was already published 3 years ago, so it was a 2022 paper, I think. Really, to me, gave this springboard to start talking about bat communication as an even more complex system. So she discovered that the pups of a specific species of bats go through a process called babbling behavior as they're learning how to say their syllables, how to produce their sounds, and that the moms of these pups speak to them, and again I'm using air quotes, in what is called motherese. So basically the mom changes the way they are producing sounds when they are directing these sounds to the pup. compared to when they're directing the sounds to another adult, which is interesting because, you know, like moms do talk in this like kind of baby voice, and it helps children learn how to speak. It know like children know it's directed at them when the mom speaks this way. So for me, this discovery that, you know, these mom bats use motherese and that the pups go through this babbling behavior where they repeat certain syllables as they are learning how to produce their sounds, it's their communication sounds. It's really striking because it does speak to a level of complexity that I don't think we have really seen before, especially like definitely not in bats, but like generally in the animal world. So to me that was like, okay, I'm going in the right direction with wanting to study communication in bats because they're clearly a good system for this question.
And where do you see both your projects heading in the next few years?
Great question. So I feel like at this point I have so many questions, and you know, I mentioned two that I've had like some exciting results recently, but we have a lot of open questions in the lab. My lab is still pretty young. As I mentioned, like we opened 3.5 years ago, and I want to understand, like, I don't know if I'll ever get answers to these questions, but I do want to understand how the brain processes auditory communication. In particular, how does a social context, for example, the presence of another bat in the room, can modulate how that sound is processed. So, you know, the idea that somebody can be speaking on the radio and you might have some reaction to that, but if you're actually interacting with somebody face to face, you will have a very different reaction to the words they're speaking, right? It's so that kind of questions, understanding how also the brain can fill in gaps in the acoustic features that it's processing. So the idea that I have an accent, but it doesn't matter. Your brain is filling in anything that I'm saying a little wrong. Your brain can fill it in, and hopefully you're understanding me, right? So how does the brain do this, and how does the brain do this when it's a very noisy environment and the acoustic landscape gets a lot more complicated? So those are the kind of questions that we're looking into and that I would hope to have some answers. And I'm also interested in understanding a little bit more about, you know, the bats and their social behavior, and how, for example, how close they are to each other, and how much roost fidelity they have may change how different receptors like oxytocin or vasopressin receptors are expressed in their brains, and how that can shape like an architecture for processing this communication sounds differently. So big and long questions to answer, and I don't know, maybe we should have another meeting in 30 years and I can tell you if I have answers to those things.
You mentioned that there are other people that do different animals based off this topic. Would you also try a different animal?
You know, in my heart of hearts, I would like to work with as many animals as possible. Pragmatically, you know, I have 2 species of bats at UIC. I work with a 3rd species in the field. Actually, I work with 2 species more in the field. It's a lot because not only the logistics of having an animal facility, which would be crazy to add even more different animals, but also keeping up with the literature. It's a lot has been coming out in the field, and you know, I want to keep up not just with the bat specific literature, but the bird literature and the marmoset literature, because I want to know what other and the mice literature, right? I want to know what other people that are studying communication are doing and how they are doing it. So I think like it would be terrifying to try to add even one more species to my repertoire. You know, to some extent you become a bit of an expert in a certain thing, and you know, you keep up with the other animals as much as you can, but just launching it yourself, I don't know, it feels daunting. I can say I work with like, at least in the lab, 2 different species. They're bats, but it's 2 different species. So yeah, for now that's what I have.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to ask, like, the podcast is really meant for neuroscience majors, and the group that organizes the podcast basically tries to help neuroscience majors get into research. This is more like a research focused group, or for neuroscience majors thinking about going also into med school, because I know a lot of neuroscience majors decide to choose the med school route.
Mm-hmm. I am also pre-med neuroscience. I would say we are very research-based, especially our events, because last year we had like a panel event to match up students and professors who are looking for research assistants. Our last event, we had a professor come in and do a panel. If you are ever interested in that, please let us know.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, definitely. Well, I guess if I want to say like one last tidbit of like things that I want to say, I think, obviously going to med school, that's a clear career path.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people think of, grad school and doing a PhD only if you want to be a professor, which was like my path. But I think today, like nowadays, grad school can be a great way of having a career that is not necessarily in med school, but could lead to like medical advances if that's something that people are interested in. It doesn't mean, like, if you do a PhD, it doesn't mean that you need to become a professor. I actually have close friends that work for AbbVie. They did a PhD and they work for the pharmaceutical companies, and pharmaceutical companies are really at the forefront of doing medical discoveries. So kind of just as a thing to say there, med school is great, but grad school can be great too, and you get a stipend instead of getting into debt, so that's a thing to consider.
Thank you for meeting with us.
Sure, it was great. It was fun.
Have a nice day.
You too. Bye.